A man stood up inside Russia's parliament and said something that made the entire room go silent. Not because it was controversial, because it was true. And the truth, in Putin's Russia, is the most dangerous weapon of all. Stay with us, because what happened next inside those walls reveals something about Russia's future that the Kremlin is desperately trying to bury. On April 21, 2026, Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov walked to the parliamentary rostrum, looked directly into the cameras of the Russian state, and said what no one inside that building was supposed to say out loud. The first quarter was a complete economic disaster, and if urgent measures are not taken immediately, Russia will face in the fall of 2026 what it faced in 1917. Let that land for a second. A senior Russian official inside the Russian parliament just compared Vladimir Putin's trajectory to the violent collapse of Tsarist Russia, the same collapse that ended an empire, the same collapse that drowned an entire dynasty in blood. This was not a slip of the tongue, this was a declaration. And if you want to understand exactly why a man with everything to lose said something that dangerous in public, keep watching, because the answer exposes the true scale of what is quietly breaking apart inside Russia right now. Here is what the Kremlin does not want trending. Just days before Zyuganov's explosive speech, on April 15th, Putin sat at the head of a high-level economic emergency meeting and did something deeply uncharacteristic. He lost his composure. When reports of a 1.8% economic contraction in just the first 2 months of 2026 were placed on the table, Putin publicly and harshly scolded his own ministers on camera. The man who spent 2 decades carefully constructing an image of cold, unshakable control cracked, visibly, in front of the entire country. And that crack is spreading fast. Former Kremlin propagandist Ilya Remeslov has now openly labeled Putin a war criminal. Western outlets are running headlines about an internal operation allegedly called Operation Twilight. And inside the Duma, the rebellion is no longer whispered. It is spoken from the microphone. If this is happening at the top of the pyramid, ask yourself, what does the bottom look like? Because that answer is where this story gets truly terrifying. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Putin's grip on power is already broken? We read every single one. To understand the full weight of Zyuganov's 1917 warning, you need to understand what 1917 actually was. It was not simply a revolution. It was a total systemic implosion, a government that refused to end an unpopular war, a population ground down by hunger and economic despair, soldiers abandoning the front in rage, and then collapse. The Romanov dynasty, one of the most powerful monarchies in human history, gone in months, not years, months. Putin is now standing inside that exact same historical corridor, a war the Russian public increasingly wants to end, an economy hemorrhaging from the inside, soldiers dying in staggering numbers on a front that is producing zero strategic gains, and a parliament where men are now invoking 1917 not as history, but as prophecy. The parallel is not poetic, it is precise, and it is being driven by something that almost nobody predicted would become Russia's single greatest military and economic nightmare. Stay with us, because this next part changes everything you thought you understood about this war. Ukraine's drone campaign has not simply damaged Russia's military. It has surgically dismantled Russia's economic engine from thousands of kilometers away, with weapons that cost a fraction of what they are destroying. As of early 2026, Kyiv has turned drone warfare into a precise, scalable, and ruthlessly efficient system of destruction. Kamikaze drones capable of traveling thousands of kilometers have penetrated Russia's most fortified air defense networks and struck directly at the country's economic core. Oil refineries, energy terminals, export infrastructure, the result is catastrophic by any measure. Between 20 and 40% of Russia's oil export capacity, the financial oxygen of the entire war effort, has been eliminated. Refinery processing capacity collapsed by 500,000 barrels per day. Oil revenues, the Kremlin's primary war chest, plummeted by 45% in the first quarter alone. The Russian federal budget recorded a staggering $61 billion deficit in just 3 months. Russia, a country that brands itself as an energy superpower, was forced to freeze all gasoline exports until July 2026 just to prevent a domestic fuel crisis. Even Russia's own defense minister, Andrei Belousov, admitted behind closed doors that Ukraine now holds clear technological superiority in drone warfare. The air defense umbrella that was supposed to make Russia untouchable has gone blind. Its Pantsir missile systems are depleted, and Ukraine's drone swarms are operating over Russian territory with a level of freedom that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. The proliferation of new air defense installations appearing around the Kremlin and Putin's personal residences tells you everything about the level of anxiety now consuming the Russian leadership. The military picture on the ground is no better. That celebrated spring offensive, the one Russian state media spent months building up with triumphant graphics and bold promises of territorial gains, has collapsed. On the Sumy and Kostiantynivka fronts, advancing Russian mechanized columns have been stopped cold and bled out by Ukrainian drone units. According to Ukrainian Ministry of Defense data from March 2026, 96% of Russia's record 35,000 troop losses in a single month were caused directly by FPV and close-range drone strikes. Russian forces are losing hundreds of soldiers every single day. They are feeding their most elite units into combat, and they are gaining nothing permanent on the map. The degradation of Russian equipment has become so severe that forces are now advancing on Chinese-made motorcycles and ATVs. Because the tanks and armored personnel carriers have been destroyed faster than they can be replaced. Ukrainian drones are hitting them before they can even form into attack position. Soldiers are going to the front without proper ballistic protection, without modern helmets, with nothing above them but the cameras of enemy drones watching every move. Meanwhile, Kremlin military spokesperson Valery Gerasimov continues to appear on state television and announce advances. The gap between what he is saying and what is actually happening on the ground has become so vast that even Russian military observers can no longer reconcile the two. Back inside Russia, the human cost of all of this is now hitting ordinary citizens directly and undeniably. The war economy has become a monster consuming civilian life from the inside. Real inflation has surpassed 20%. Food prices have become punishing. The service sector is collapsing. To fund the ballooning military budget and cover a $61 billion deficit, the government raised value-added tax to 22%, squeezing a public that is already stretched to the edge. Daily polling data from the independent Levada Center now shows that more than 67% of Russians want the war to end immediately and unconditionally. The hardline nationalist faction demanding full occupation of Ukraine has collapsed to just 24%, the lowest point recorded since the invasion began. Putin's personal approval rating, once a weapon he wielded proudly, is in measurable freefall. And when the Kremlin attempted to silence the growing public anger with a sweeping digital blackout across central Moscow, cutting mobile internet and telegram across a massive area stretching from Lubyanka to Moscow City, they made the classic mistake of every panicking dictatorship. They made it worse. The pressure they applied became fuel. Russian influencer Victoria Bonia posted a raw, direct video calling out Putin by name. It was watched 30.8 million times in days. The wall of fear, so carefully maintained for 2 decades, now has visible cracks running through it. The decay is not limited to Moscow. Regional anger is erupting across Siberia and the Far East, where local populations are publicly stating that Moscow extracted their resources for decades, sent their sons to die in a war they did not choose, and abandoned them entirely. Infrastructure failures and flood disasters in Dagestan are exposing state incompetence at every level. Inside the military establishment, the Kremlin has resorted to internal purges, arresting figures like Ruslan Shalikov, a close associate of former Defense Minister Shoigu, in a transparent attempt to assign blame for corruption that runs through the entire system. In a move that reads as almost deliberately ominous, the FSB Academy was renamed after Felix Dzerzhinsky, the architect of the original Soviet Red Terror, as if invoking that name might conjure back the fear that is visibly slipping away. It will not work. The tools that sustain this regime, propaganda, energy wealth, military mythology, and public fear, are all failing simultaneously, and they are failing not because of external pressure alone, but because of the internal contradictions that authoritarian systems always eventually produce. Everything converging here, the parliamentary rebellion, the economic freefall, the drone campaign dismantling Russia's war machine, the collapsing public support, the regional fractures, the desperate internal purges, is pointing toward a single, unavoidable conclusion. The Russian Federation in 2026 is not on a stable war footing. It is in an advanced state of institutional decay. Zyuganov did not invoke 1917 as a rhetorical flourish. He invoked it because the structural similarities are real, measurable, and accelerating. The three pillars holding this system up, military credibility, economic stability, and public compliance, are cracking simultaneously under a pressure that grows daily. History does not repeat exactly, but for regimes that refuse to learn from it, it tends to arrive at the same destination. Do you believe Russia's elites and oligarchs will move against Putin before the system collapses entirely? Or will they wait too long, just like those who surrounded the last Tsar? And was Russia's fundamental strategic error staking its entire war doctrine on heavy mechanized forces in an era where a $500 drone can destroy a $3 million tank? Tell us exactly what you think in the comments below. We publish a fresh, deeply researched analysis every single day, so if you want to stay ahead of what is actually happening inside this war, not just what state media on any side wants you to believe, make sure you hit subscribe. This is the kind of coverage that matters.